So everybody, good morning, good afternoon. Dr. Jed Applerouth here talking about the digital SAT, and especially for international students and counselors, IECs, here with a colleague and friend, Ian Harkins. Ian is a long tenured tutor. He's been with us, for many years, and he'll be actually, he's helping us with, understanding the test, analysis, teaching the test, and he'll be giving webinars on this topic in the coming months as well. So I wanted to make sure everyone knew Ian, and also I'll be calling on him because he actually is deep in the trenches working with students on this test, understanding how things are shifting. How he's worked with hundreds of students for the classic SAT and how things are going to be different for the digital test. So he'll be able to give some color commentary in a way even beyond what I could offer with his depth of experience. All right, so let's begin. So first, a little bit of a precursor. Applerouth, why are we here? One of the primary things are our beliefs, our defining beliefs in our companies. When you change kids' beliefs about themselves, their abilities, their potentials, you can change their lives. And that's something that we hold dear to our hearts. The three things that we do academic tutoring, we do test preparation, and we do coaching for executive functioning, EF coaching for kids. All three of those things, that's our wheelhouse. And let's jump right in. So you all know the SAT is changing yet again. It changed the year after I took it in 94. It was recentered and the scores popped like about 100 points. Antonyms went away. And then I was teaching, I was in the thick of it in 05 when they brought over the writing and they integrated the essay, they got rid of analogies. I was deep in the thick of it in 2016 when they brought in the Common Core, they overhauled, got rid of the old vocabulary. There was new Common Core math. And yet again, we are here at another evolution change. And it's going to be digital, it's going to be adaptive, it's going to be short passages. So it's about time. Every 10 years, it's time for a new test. And this change is, I think, substantial in terms of the way it's being delivered. Some of the presentation of the verbal. We'll talk about all that in detail over the next hour. So in terms of the digital test, they've been getting ready for this thing for years and years and years. They've been administering digital tests for many years at district levels here, where I live in Atlanta, parts of the country. And they got huge experience administering the AP exam to over 2 million kids, learning how do we do this? How do we scale this? Simultaneously testing kids across the country. And it actually was pretty much a success. There was an error rate of less than 1%. And then those kids were able to go back in there and update their stuff later. But they learned how to do this. So now they're making the bold move, and I think the right move, towards computer adaptive testing, which is eventually where all testing goes. And Scantron's become a thing of the last century. That's coming. So timelines, 5 months. In 5 months, our students will be taking the first ever digital adaptive SAT for all internationals. December 2022, in less than 2 months, we have the last paper-based test outside of the US. That's going to be a very subscribed test, I guarantee that one. As students aren't sure, whenever there's a change, we always see like the last one before, it's subscribed. I saw that when the GRE changed 2010. I saw that with the changes for the SAT. There's always a lot of rush to get in before things shift because people aren't sure about changes. It's a natural human thing. The paper goes away for internationals in March. And then for the US students, we're going to have, in a year from now, 11 months from now, we're going to have the digital PSAT. And then in March 2024, all paper goes away for the US market. So that is coming. And the timeline, it seems like they're hitting all their targets. There's a real question of are they going to actually hit this, or are they going to cave? In 2015, they delayed a year, but that was because of California. California balked and said, we're not going to take it. We're not sure we're ready for this. They pushed it a year. They didn't want to lose California. Well, lo and behold, they've now lost California. So California doesn't have the kind of leverage they used to have. And they actually changed the test in 2005. That was for Richard Atkins, his office, the president of the UC system. They changed it in 2015, 16. But now California isn't part of the picture. They look like they are dead on track. This summer, they released their practice tests. In the fall, last week, they released full practice tests via Khan Academy and the College Board. And they also gave the first full reportable scores about 2 months ago from the digital pilots in August. So they're hitting all their benchmarks. Things are moving. So it looks like, yeah, they're going to actually hit this thing in March. We've seen no indication to the contrary. There's one question. Okay, so yeah, throw ahead, load in your questions, and I will give you We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So I will hope to answer many of your questions before then, but then for sure, if you want to throw questions in, we'll have plenty of time at the end. And then next year, October, I mentioned, is domestic version. And then the fall, they're going to release the study showing the predictive validity, showing the R-squared value. How much does this new test predict performance? And it should line up very well with current testing, which is, the SAT is a good predictor of performance in college, right there with high school grades. And together, you have a better bump than independently. And then in March of next year, everything is digital adaptive everywhere in the world. All right, so moving on. Practice tests. That was a big deal last week, October 18th. We had 4 full-length digital tests that are now available for you all to peruse, for your kids to work on. And that gives us real confidence. These things are ready, they're up. And the app, the Blue Book app, is the exact app they're going to be using in 5 months. So it's already up, it's functional, it's not buggy, it's working, and they're going to bring in their devices. So whatever they're working on is going to be the exact same situation as they're going to see in 5 months. So they're pretty much ready. There's things to work out in terms of with the schools, logistics, but it's honestly not very much. So the Blue Book app, you go online, you download it, bluebookapp.collegeboard.org. You all can download a copy as educators and play with it. You can see what their kids are going to see. It's very simple, and I think it's pretty elegant. I was actually surprised. I think the user experience team over there at College Board, they did a good job. Things make sense. Things are streamlined. Like I didn't even read the instructions. I opened it up and I knew where to find things. It just made sense. So I think, user interface, user experience, they did a good job with that. It's fairly intuitive. And it's streamlined. There wasn't extra stuff. It was, it's easy to find. Like the tools, what I liked is the tools are all up in the right corner. I open it up. I can highlight. I can annotate. I can have my timer. I can turn it on and off. I can find the math reference sheet with a click and close it, put it away. I want to see where I am in a test. There's a button at the bottom. It shows me exactly where I am, my progress. Have I omitted any? It's all like very, very elegant, very thoughtful. And additionally, at the same time, they released the 4 digital tests that are adaptive. You can go and download 4 linear non-adaptive tests. And, just for more practice. The overwhelming majority of students will not take these tests unless you have an accommodation in which you can't use a computer test, but ultimately these are great for practice. So that's very helpful. So in terms of the why they're doing this, I'll speak quickly about this. Ultimately, these are much more consistent and is reliable. For students, there's no more gritting or bubbling or errors from misgrading, which is lovely. You're going to have the ability to administer more tests on demand during the school day, which is a very big deal. That's been one of the major growth engines for the SAT. And accommodations are easier to deliver and administer, and test security. These are massively more secure than paper. Paper has always been the Achilles heel. If the test leaks out, someone, bad actor, because these things go out in advance, someone sees it, they share it. But now there's no test form. There's no one, everyone has a different test. So it's like, even if you have it, your answer is like A, B, C, D, it's not going to help your neighbor. So this is really a tremendous leap forward in test security, which is why I'm so happy it's here. And results are going to be available within days, not weeks. And it's just more efficient. It's faster. So we're saving kids time. It's less about, mental endurance. It's really, ultimately, this is where everything goes. This is where the MCAT goes, the GMAT, the TOEFL, all testing goes this direction. So they're moving towards the future with this. I think it's, it's about time. And they're actually behind the curve. The GRE, the GMAT, these have been, digital for a quarter century. So they're finally catching up with the rest of the testing industry. So again, dramatically more secure. They're going to have dozens and dozens of baseline sections and thousands of problems to create a unique test for each student. So that eliminates the risk of item exposure of, hey, this item's been seen too many times. And additionally, we think they're going to be using something called templating, where like for a math question, you'll have a math question with templated, so they can just change the numbers and it changes the answers 1,000 times. So it's not, I memorized the answer is 14. It's, for this student, the answer is 14. For this student, the same problem, the answer is going to be 33. This student is 75. And so templating allows you to take advantage of technology to have an infinite problem bank, essentially. So that's pretty nifty. Big changes, high level. We're shaving off 50 minutes of testing time, and even more so on the front end. There's no more gritting in, entering what's your school code, what's your address. That's all in there already. So before you go to the test center, 2 days prior, you entered all that. And then all you do when you get to the test center is enter the code for that. They give you a code, it unlocks their test. So it's going to just shave off about an hour and a half of testing time total, which is tremendous. Because right now you go in there at 8 o'clock, you leave by 12:30. But now, I mean, you're going to go in there at 8 o'clock and, 10:30, 10:45, you're finished. So, it's going to be, that's a big deal. Shorter reading passages, we'll talk more about that. Ian has some thoughts on that as well. And the calculator is always there and becomes much more of a big deal on this test. And kids get a lot more time per question. If they have to annotate on paper, they have more time to do it, and so forth. Other changes for internationals, there are 2 new dates. So now there are going to be 7 for domestic kids and 7 for international kids. That's pretty groovy. There's going to be a lot more flexibility. The fact that you can give this test in 2.5 hours versus 4.5 hours means you're going to be able to give it to half the juniors on Monday, half of them on Tuesday, half the sophomore class. And we've already seen this massive skyrocketing in testing during the school day. It used to be about 1/3 of kids just 3-4 years ago. And now it's almost 2/3 of kids are taking it during the school day at some time. And then fast test return. The dates. So here we go. Just a quick snapshot. Starting, they're adding a new November test date, not this year, but next year. And they're also adding a new June test date. So the test dates for the SAT, they're going to be August, and then October, November, December, March, May, and then June. That's great. And then there are going to be 7 also for the ACT. So you have 7 ACT, 7 SAT. That is more options for kids, which is a good thing. So in terms of the content, it's predominantly staying the same kind of questions. There are some changes. They can't ask, like within a passage, a bunch of different things, how the paragraphs change, because now there's only one paragraph. So certain question types are going away. But other, and they're adding a few other ones. The math is mostly the same, those less reading intensive. And we're going to go deeper into each one of these sections. And then scoring, they're saying the scoring is not going to change. So they're trying to make them equivalent. If you get a 650 on the current test, for all intents and purposes, you should get the same score on the digital test. That hasn't been the case for every student. Some kids do better, some kids do worse, some kids need practice, some kids, and there is a place for practicing becoming more familiar with the content. That's really important. You don't ever walk into anything cold. That just has a rule of thumb for life. So let's do a deeper dive now into what we're seeing. Timing. So the total timing for the test is 2 hours and 24 minutes. That's including the 10-minute break. That's it. So once you press start in 2:24, you're leaving, you're finished. That's amazing. And you press upload and off you go. And so it's remarkably shorter. That's a huge deal. And the amount of time per question is massively increased. Here we go. The timing change. So in the digital SAT, the verbal section, now you have 71 seconds per question compared to 44 on the ACT. That's a big deal. That's a 60% extra timing accommodation. That's huge. Mathematics, you have 1 minute per question on the ACT. Now you have 95 seconds per question on the SAT. That again is a massive increase. So kids with processing speed are going to do better on this test. And part of it is this was highly, highly intentional. They did evaluations, they hired psychometricians, and they said, you know what, if we give the test with this many items, we still have some of the slower kids not finishing, why don't we shave off more questions? And by shaving off more questions, they said, there were many, many more kids who were able to finish without having to rush. And so they reduced the math number of items, and they reduced verbal. And so they're just making it less speedy. So they're being very thoughtful. And this is, I think, a very nice thing for the kids. The structure, here it is. We have the reading and writing baseline is 32 minutes with some questions. And then instantly you go from your baseline to your adaptive. We'll talk about what that is. Then 10-minute break. Then we go to math. We shift for 35-minute math section, 22 questions. And then we go to the adaptive math, and then you're finished. So that's the test. And the section structure, within the section, every section has 2 experimental questions embedded. And so far, it's hard to tell which ones are experimental. I think what they have to do is a little bit of pre-vetting to make sure that you don't throw at someone a question that's experimental, which is totally in left field, or it might throw kids off. But I've now taken about 2 full tests now, and the adaptive tests, and I couldn't tell which ones are experimental. They really seem seamless, which means they've done a little bit of pre-work to make sure they weren't egregious or confusing. And what they're doing is they're testing these questions for difficulty level, and as well as for bias, making sure that there's no bias in terms of ethnicity, there's no bias gender, there's no bias demographically, there's no bias by where you live. And what this does, because you are testing hundreds of thousands of kids and they have different questions, I can test, let's say 5,000 questions using that pool, versus with a fixed test form, I can only test 25 questions. So they're going to be able to build a bigger and bigger and bigger problem bank faster and faster and faster, because you only need, let's say, a few hundred kids or 1,000 kids to make sure there's no bias, and they're going to be able to do that many times over with their 8 questions per test, per kid. So it's embedded. It's only 8% of the test, and this is definitely a change. Most, it's always been, there was a standalone separate experimental section testing the reliability and difficulty levels, but now they're going to be baking them in, and it allows them to be shorter. And so far, I think it's a good thing. Now, adaptive, what does it mean? So it's going to be section adaptive, not item adaptive. Item adaptive is a GMAT where, every question, it's called item response theory. Every question you take will determine what's the next question you get. And so it's constantly calibrating. Section adaptive, you can go back and forth in your section until you press submit. The final, section ends, and then it analyzes your performance, and then it feeds you either an easier or harder section. So I can go back and forth. I can change my answers. There's no penalty. It's just, you have the first half an hour on one test. And that's not so different than, honestly, the ACT, where you have half an hour section, and next half an hour section. And so there's no single set test form of adaptive, but here you are getting a fixed form. But the earlier questions can affect you more. If you do very poorly on the first section, that's going to impact what you can accomplish, and it'll affect the next one you get. So here's the grid to understand what this means. So adaptive testing, you start off with a baseline verbal test, and I'll show you what that means. And then if you do relatively poorly, they're going to give you an easier verbal section. If you do relatively well, they'll give you a harder. And then same thing for math. Math baseline, easier or harder. So the scoring, this is the actual scoring from the current test. So for math, there are 20 operational items to experimental in the baseline section. So if I get 15 or above, I gain access to the harder math section. If I get under 15, so if I get, let's say, 13 right, I'm going to be funneled into the easier math section. Now, once I'm in the easier math, my scoring range, I can't get more than a 650 because I've already missed 6 questions. And that's the same for the current test. If I miss 6 questions, I'm already below 700. So this, it kind of locks you in, and they're going to feed me easier questions. If I get 15 right, even if I tank every other question, I can't get below a 550 because I've already gotten 15 right. And so those count, those are locked in. That's how the scoring works. And here's, going to the harder module, we found that it's on the first practice test, if you get 15, then you advance. And then on the verbal, the cutoff was 18 right. So it looks like you have to get about 2/3 of the questions right, a little bit more, to go to the harder module. That seems to be the cut score. It's going to swing a little bit by practice test if there are easier or harder items, but every test has its own scale. But talking to your kids, tell them if you get roughly 2/3 right, you earn the harder one. If you don't, you go to the easier one. And if you're suddenly getting a flood of easy questions, especially on math, then you're in the easier module. And so adaptive. Again, once you anchor your points in, they're yours. You can't lose them. You locked in those questions, and your score is already capped. And then within the section, as we understand, all the items have the same weight. That it's not, that question 5 counts more than question 8. They're all, the same raw points. So they don't get more weighted as you go through the section. And difficulty level is randomized on verbal, and it's increasing on math, which is pretty standard for most tests for the ST and the ACT historically. And they're going to use equating to determine the raw score to scale score for every section. The weights are not going to be identical for every section you take. So the raw to scale for the easier will be different than the raw to scaled on the harder. They're going to have their own calculus for that. So here is scoring. Again, now that we have these tests, we are working them, we're going through them with our team. And so we're just trying to find the edge. And so if you get everything right on the verbal module 1, we tried, if I get only 4 right, which honestly is worse than chance, so that's really unusual, then I get a 560. Then if I kind of go through, if I get 6 right, 580, if I get 12 right, 610, you're going to see the range up to the 800 if I get all 27 right. And so similarly, we're working the math. If I nail the math section, everything's right on the baseline math. Then if I get, only one right, I'm going to 570 all the way up to the 800. You can see how this plays out. So we're working on the scales because, Applerouth is building its own test too. We're going to be working with the test provided by the College Board. We are also actively working to build our own tests so our kids have ample practice way beyond the 8 they offer from the College Board. So the scoring edges. So it seems like if you get funneled into the easier module, you're not getting higher than 50. And if you make your way up to the harder module, you're not getting below a 460. That seems to be like for the math. And there will be some variability, some variance here. So easier, harder modules. There is a big difference in difficulty level when you get to the easier and hard modules, especially for the math. I mean, they just feel like different tests. And so here on the easier module, the first one we saw, that 16 of the questions were easy medium compared to 5 are easy medium in the hard module. So it's really, a very different level of difficulty. Here is the shape of the first test on the SAT that they offered. So the middle module is the center. The blue one is where they give everyone. Everyone gets a baseline. So I have a couple easy level 1, and we were estimating that we were assigned difficulty levels by Applerouth. They weren't given by the College Board. You have 10 level 2, 7 level 3, and then 3 level 4. So they're giving you the range of questions. If I, again, miss more than 7, I'm thrown into module 2 easy, which is I have 7 level 1, I have 9 level 2, only 5 level 3, and only 1 level 4. So I still have a range of easy, medium, and hard, but see how it's skewed towards the easy side. And then on the flip side, with module 2, if I get to the hard one, let's say I get my 16 questions right on math. So I'm going to have 1 level 1 question. I'm going to have 4 level 2. I'm going to have 12 level 3. And then I'm going to have, I'm going to move my pictures here. And then I'm going to have 5 level 4. So Ian, looking at this, just, you've worked with, I don't know how many thousands of students and tests. When you see this, what any thoughts when you see the shapes of these tests, these modules?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, I mean, the way that we assigned these difficulty levels, yes, it was a little bit arbitrary, but we thought, okay, difficulty level 1, this is what we think that even our students would have known how to do in sort of a middle school. Difficulty 2 is, okay, you have to think about it. Difficulty 3 is we would have to teach you something. There's something that's in our normal course curriculum that we would assign to people. Difficulty 4 is very much like we would be really impressed at a student who'd be able to get it. So Jed, you're absolutely right that the module 2 for hard, like there's quite a lot of challenging math problems there. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it feels like a different test. Now, that said, there's still a vast minority of these types of problems. I'm sort of gearing up to address a question that I saw on our feed that says, will it be easier or harder to get a good score? Will the bell curve be wider? I think that where you will see maybe where those 800s and 700s scores come in, they'll be made on the margins of these difficulty level 4 questions. I kind of like for it's not the lower scoring students, but the students who are assigned the module 2 easy questions. I kind of like that they'll have this opportunity to showcase. I think that you'll have a lot of crowding around the 600s now. And I don't know how that will shake out when colleges and universities are asked to pass out this information. I look forward to seeing how they delve through that. And we keep pretty good track of what all the US-based universities say are their median scores as well. So we'll keep gathering all of that information, see where their cutoffs are and everything. Whether there are just some schools that stipulate you have to have gotten through to the module 2 hard or not. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how these ultimate decision makers of these schools like try to pass out all this information.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I like, I mean, the reason you have these different shapes, and this is the whole point of adaptive testing. This is how we get from 58 items down to 44 items, because we're trimming away the items that really weren't that helpful. And so for, level 1 difficulty, a student who's getting all of them, getting all the level 2s and 3s right, do you have to really feed them more level 1s? And the test makers say, no, we're going to give them 1 level 1 versus the kids in the easier module, we're giving them 7 because those are more appropriate. So you become more efficient with these different shapes. That's the whole point of the exercise. And we trim out the content that's not as helpful because we already know. And the same thing, if a kid misses all the level 3s and 4s, do you want to give them a whole bunch more? Like, no, they're probably not going to get those without random guessing. Let's really help them distinguish between that 560 and that 580. We can get there faster with fewer items. We're not going to waste a bunch of 4s on them, which they're not going to get right, most likely. That's the whole premise of the adaptive engine. So that's what we're seeing there. In terms of math, there are fewer problems. We're knocking off 14 problems. That's a quarter of the test gone. And that feels more manageable. You have fewer items to work with. It's shorter. It's not such a burden, not as cumbersome. Now, the reading burden is down. And this felt different looking at this. The test, I've been doing this for 21 years now. And, I saw the ballooning of the language when they added the Common Core math in 2015, 16. And the items got more text heavy, and it was Common Core. Can you read? It was a whole question of it was math literacy. Can I read text and extract the math? That was the question. Are you math literate? We're getting back towards, do you know pure math again? There's some math literacy, but it's really reduced. So that is one shift. So 70% of the items are going to be pure math problems, like here's the math, and 30% are going to be in the context of science or real world applications, but versus the Common Core test in 15, 16 was dominant by those. So that's a real shift. And so the SC math may be even less reading heavy than the AC math. And that's a sea change there. And one thing they're doing is their phrasing is changing. They're using linguistic modification. They're trying to get rid of colloquial artifacts, idioms, turns of phrase, compound, complex sentences that are harder for ESL kids. Trying to really reduce it. Do you know math? And that's really a shift, because before, some of the pure math kids who weren't great in English had a harder time with the ST math because it was so text heavy. But now they're going to do better. So kids who are ESL kids, non-native speakers, should do better on this section because it is more pure math. It's more about math skills, less about reading skills. That's a pivot, going back to where it was 10 years ago. A few focus changes. Currently we're going to be popping the geometry and trig from 8% to 15%. That's a shift, almost doubling that. And then Desmos. There's been so much discussion at Applerouth about what this means. And I took the test myself with Desmos, and it felt different. I mean, I've been teaching this for, again, over 2 decades, and having a calculator, but having it right there, having it right next to the problem, being able to plug things in, and kind of they're designing it in such a way that you can use it on a more regular basis. And so it's going to change the feel of the math section. And some kids who are really, calculator, handy and facile, it's going to just, be their experience. So it's right there next to the content. And we found that you can plug things into equations, you can back things out, and it made the adaptive module much easier. Our head of math curriculum and content development, like Sarah, talked about, what a difference it was. Ian, you've been involved, you're so in this. What are your thoughts about the impact of Desmos and your experience, your first flush with the test?
I like it an awful lot. It was, I mean, when I took it, it felt really comfortable. Actually, I have no bad notes about it, and I think a lot of this is going to be about. This felt like going back once upon a time when the Maths 2 was out as a subject test. It became about how do you use the calculator. I think a lot of this is going to be about teaching students how to use this device. Yeah, and that versus moving away from math literacy and memorization. Can I do long division?
That was a
Yeah.
thing. Like, honestly, in this day and age, we all have a supercomputer in our pocket. The ability to do long division now is, or convert fractions, decimals. If you have, 3 keystrokes, half a second, you're there. So, but
Which
can I
is nice,
use,
right? We
yeah,
want to, sorry to interrupt, but
no, please.
we want to be able to reflect in the test what it is we're going to be doing with math questions in real life. Like, we
Yeah.
don't need to necessarily remember the quadratic formula off the top of our heads, but we need to know what to do when we have a problem, when we need to find a solution, and we have this device at our fingertips.
Exactly. This is a real
So
world.
I
It's how,
like it.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's less mental math. I mean, it's a nice thing to test, but ultimately we have our machines on us always. There is some slight changes, algebra, a little more algebra, and then the advanced math, a little bit more. They're cutting back on this section called problem solving and data analysis, and that is percentages, probabilities, organizing data, and basic stats. That's being reduced the most, and in lieu, they're popping, geo and trig. Some of the numbers are a little bit varied based on how we're cutting it, but that's one shift. We still think we'll see the full range of questions, but just fewer questions on probability or percentages or so forth. That was one comment. So here, just showing you every test varies, it's not locked in. Here's our analysis of the first 2 tests. So algebra, from the intro section to the adaptive lower, adaptive higher, it varies. There's no one clear pattern. Like, there's more advanced math on the first section, that digital test 2, then it actually drops down. It's kind of interesting. So all this is to show you is that there's variability, that every module will have fluctuations. You can't say there's always going to be 4 geo questions, 3. No, it'll vary from test to test and module to module. So there's going to be some play within these tests. And the nice thing is the questions are grouped by type. You get into these blocks of types. I saw that, like, for the Desmos, there were like 6 graphing questions simultaneously. So you get into this, so it's not like popcorn where I do a graphing, algebra, then I come back graphing. It really puts you in, like, now we're handling this kind of question, especially, that was my graphic experience of getting into the zone or finding intercepts and things, getting into that nice zone. So it felt like a subsection that was new. Now, any other thoughts, Ian, on math before we move on to verbal?
I want to move on to verbal, because verbal is the one that you hit all the greatest hits about how the topics are changing. The big thing that I'm glad you noticed is that geometry and trigonometry are going up, whereas data analysis is going down. It feels less of a pure algebra test,
Yeah,
like it used to be. Yeah, but this section is where I see some of the bigger changes, the English sections.
let's do it. So one thing they, back in 2005, they brought writing into the verbal, and became, critical reading and writing. And then the scores were separate in 2016, like they kept them distinct, and they, could see how they did on verbal, how they did on writing. I'm sorry, on reading and writing. Now there's no distinction. It's all the same. And there's like overlap, and then the questions, you can't even tell, is it a writing question? Is it a reading question? There's more cohesion in the section. So it's really blended. And so, like the reading questions feel like writing expression of ideas questions, and there are no more subscores. So now it's just verbal, or, it's still evidence-based reading and writing. I call it verbal because that's what I called it back in 2001. Reading, it's short, but don't think short is easy. It's not easy. The level of difficulty is as high, if not higher, than tests we've seen in the past 5 years. They're throwing in Jane Austen and Shakespearean sonnets and very tough science passages. It's a different kind of test. Well, we'll give some color on that. But one thing that they give you a paragraph and a question, next. Paragraph, question, next. You're not ever getting into a groove of one long form passage. However, counterbalancing some of the thoughts were from our tutors that this requires a certain level of mental agility. Like someone said it was like doing TikTok, or it's like, like you're on this thing, next thing, this topic, science, next topic. And that takes a certain kind of mindset to be able to bounce like that. And Ian, you had thoughts on that in terms of how it affected you personally trying to do this test.
I did, and I know you disagreed with me. So I'll come in with the pro, and you can come in with the con if you like. I saw we had a question that I was going to get to as well. The question and answer specifically about how would international students start to prepare for this. My angle is I've taught a lot of English as second language students, particularly out of Europe and Asia, for both the SAT and the ACT. So my concern looking at how they do all of these is there's going to be, as you said, quite a bit of nimbleness required from having to go from not just one question to one question, but one entire topic to another entire topic. And the questions, as you said, Jed, can be anything from, what is the overall purpose of the passage, to what single word best finishes this passage, or what, they do have, some vocab in context, like what we're familiar with. So it can be anything and everything in between, and you need to be able to jump from topic to topic. You can't sit with a passage nearly like you could on the last one, on the current one. So that's some of the things that I am keen to see how students can adapt, especially if English is a second language to you, as these are the students who are going to be taking this first, how that change from topic to topic hurts or helps your scores.
The one counterpoint, I mean, I've worked with kids before when they would just get bored by a passage, they'd fall out of it. Now it's just one question. So if you're not into this topic, you're not going to have to spend 9 questions and like, how do I stay interested? If it isn't your thing, it's only one question, moving on. So that's one balancing point but for ESL kids, I get that. However, so having the topics shift, science, literature, poetry, this kind of, that takes some nimbleness. However, they're grouping question types. Like you'll have 5 vocab questions in sequence. Then you'll have, 5 craft and structure questions in sequence, and you get into a certain mindset. I saw that. Like then there'll be 5, like the bullet point list questions in a row. So there are, even though the topics shift, I'm changing from literature to humanities to science, but they're still asking the similar kind of question. And these are some comments from Kiesner, one of our heads of content development. Much less grammar emphasis compared to the other tests, more vocab emphasis, which may be tougher for some internationals. We'll talk about what that means. We're getting rid of idiom questions, and that's good for ESL kids. And there's more of a diversity of ideas and tones with smaller passages. Now the grouping of question types, where I get 5 vocab questions in a row. So as you do more practice, you'll kind of get, now I'm in the vocab section, it's a subsection, it's not official. And that may be beneficial. Additionally, there are big increases in more humanities. You saw a bit of poetry, more surveys of artists, and there's a bigger focus in terms of grammar on transitions. We're seeing a lot more of that. And Ian, any more reflections on any of these bullets or the thoughts on that? Where we're going?
I realize I'm getting more questions about international students, but no, the huge sort of increase here is the poetry. As you said, there's some Shakespearean sonnets in there. This was this hasn't been around since again the SAT subject test in literature. Yeah,
that's right.
And I don't know yet what that is going to involve. I don't know if they're going to ask, like they did on that test, like some more poetry specific vocab questions. Yeah,
we'll see. And then the poetry, it's, they throw in some Whitman, they're looking at a variety of some Shakespeare, and they're short. It's like a 10-liner, little Dickinson's, little song, little poem. And they're also, these I actually really like. I see the value of these rhetorical synthesis questions. They give you a bunch of bullets. So there's no paragraph. This is a bunch of bullets, and they say, while researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes, and then they ask you a question from that. So, so much of our information is bulleted now. Can I synthesize, from that a certain inference? I use those notes, and then like having 5 of those in a row. I kind of like that. I think it's a useful new question type. And then again, showing you the same concept that there's variability, words in context. It swings from the intro, then there's more in the second and adaptive sections. It's kind of showing you some of the swings, that every test will not be the same. Like, for question test 1, there were 4 baseline things on transitions. In test 2, there's only 1 in the first section. So it's like, well, and then synthesis questions, that was the bullet points. There was 2 of them on test one for the first baseline, and there were 6 of them, which I saw that on test 2. So there is variability, and so a different experience based on which test you get. So you know that you have to be, it's not all the same, and so there's some flexibility there. We did an analysis. I just did some quick dividing. I added up all the question, the passage types for the 4 tests we have, and I divided by 4. And so literature looks like you have about 2 passages per module on lit. Poetry is, a few of them have more, but on the first section you have an average of 1.5 poetry things on the baseline, 0 on the second upper, and only 1.25. And again, this may be a fluke of, but it's not like there's like 10 poetry. It's still a small portion of what kids are seeing. A couple of Shakespeare, Dickinson, so forth. History 3 to 4. Look at science. So natural science is getting a lot of love. They're at like 10, on this upper, the lowers. So let's add that together. That's like 18. Between the lower, the baseline and the next one, the adaptive section. Then humanities, you're looking at about 12 to 15. Okay, giving a sense of where things are. So vocabulary, it's there, but anyone who says go and learn flashcards, no, those are dead. Fine, they were lovely. That was a nice time we had for 2001 to 16, but now the vocabulary they're assessing you is not like obscure words. It's common usage, but words which have different meanings. And so you have to read in context. And so it's a lower tier, it's day-to-day common usage, but in which definition. So there's no memorizing vocab words anymore. And then there are going to be many test forms. And they said it's been designed so everyone is going to have a comparable but unique version. And we don't know exactly what that means yet. Are they using templating? Are they going to be shifting out a big problem bank? But this is what makes cheating so damn hard on this new test, if not impossible, which is the whole point, to get rid of all those testing scandals and cheating scandals. So we talked about this. What does it mean? They may generate different test forms. So this they change the order around. They may actually generate totally different test items. They may use templating. So there are slight changes in a vocab question or slight changes in a grammar question. So they're shifting words around or shifting math numbers around. So it's similar, but different order. And so if your answer is B, my answer is D, and so forth. So it's a lot harder to cheat on this new world. And then how it's going to work. So students download the Blue Book app, then they do a demo. When you get to the test center, they give you a start code, you plug it in, and you're live, and you're on. You have directions per screen. There's going to be a break. There's a timer right up there. There's going to be a combination of multiple choice questions. And in math, you have the grid-ins, student response questions. You always have the paper, and you can bring a pencil or a pen and work with that. And the score reports are going to link up again with Khan like they have for the past, almost 7-8 years. All right. Now, some have asked us, do you expect it to be a train wreck? In terms of we know that the ACT had some real problems, but they were relying upon the devices of the school's network. It was a different thing. Now you bring your own device, and now you only have to be connected to the internet for a few seconds to get your start code, enter it, then it's on your device, and then when you're finished, you upload it. So if there's like 10 internet failures during that time, it doesn't matter. It's only at the beginning and the end for seconds. And if it doesn't start until, then you wait until it's downloaded, do your test, and then upload it. So if the Wi-Fi crashes, and even if the power goes out, the idea is they're going to have charging stations, they're going to have power cords for kids with extra time to help them. There'll be a room set up for that. So they're solving for so many issues. And the fact that it's BYOD, that changes it. There's no limitations of you only have 20 Chromebooks. No, and then also they've promised they can help coordinate if you need a Chromebook or laptop, they can help get you one. And we haven't figured out those logistics, how they're going to handle that shipping to different countries and so forth. But that should be easier domestically and so forth. So again, they promised loaner devices. But the fact that you download it ahead and it's all locked, that's really helpful. And so the way it works, it's like if you've ever used Google Documents, if it crashes, it goes back and I open it up again, it's saved to the keystroke. So it's downloading, it's real-time downloading with every keystroke, it's uploading the current form, it's all time-stamped. And so if it goes down and I had 10 minutes left and I was on question 13, I'd answer them all in a certain sequence. If my computer crashes or goes down, I upload it again, I turn it back on, And it's, at that instant, that second, everything's loaded up again, which is so secure. And that's why Google Documents is so amazing, where it saves it and timestamps every keystroke. It's so well thought out, honestly. I'm impressed by this. So, and they're going to have digital support for test centers. They're not going to have any equipment. They're going to fund a tech coordinator for every site. They're going to make sure that the Wi-Fi is working, the staff devices are working, and they're going to help troubleshoot things. That's a common, the College Board is funding this. And there's going to be a dedicated help room where there's a problem, I'm having a hard time, you walk out of the room, go to the thing, and again, your time is saved exactly where you were. So this should solve for a lot of problems. So they're going to have dedicated customer service reps. I'm sure they're going to staff it up and have a bunch of temp employees waiting on a massive phone, call centers. And also, students can borrow a device. And you can expect to get charging support if you're doing more than a 3-hour test. So for kids with extra time and a half, and so forth, they can talk and work with a tech coordinator. The tools, the timer, it's nice. It's right there. I can hide it or show it with a button. Very helpful. The reference sheet of formulas, I like, you can take it, you can move it around, you can hide it. Way better than going back and forth, the front. I remember kids having to memorize, and I can just pull it up and see it. So less memorization, less, working memory. And I love this feature. I love at the very bottom, I click a thing and it shows me where I am on the test, which ones I flagged, which ones I omitted. I can toggle back and forth instantly versus before I'd flip back and forth trying to find the thing I circled. It's just all right there. And so if I have a minute left, I can go back quickly to the ones I flagged, bam, bam, answer C, answer C, answer C. It's very efficient, very helpful, just good design. Ultimately, this is good design. And then accommodations are going to be seamless. I enter my disabilities code and bam, I get extra breaks, extra time. I have text-to-speech, I have contrast, and I have font, so I can integrate the Desmos screen reader thing. It's really smart. Accommodations for disabilities get easier and better. And there is still the paper combination. If for whatever reason I can't use a computer, I'm going to have a paper test. The paper test is going to be 30 minutes longer. The linear test forms, again, most kids won't get this, but some kids may if they have a visual acuity issue, they can't read a screen, some kind of reason like that. Here's what this is. You have an extra 7 minutes on the reading and writing. There are no experimental questions. Every question counts. So we have 33 operational questions on reading and writing per section, and you have 27 for math. So that's 54 functional math questions and 56 functional verbal questions. And so it's half an hour more, and then that's the one difference. So paper tests, it's not sure, again, who gets the accommodation for paper. There's a question of, will there be security issues again, because paper is vulnerable. And then item exposure, if there are only a few, 10 linear tests, can someone go and do a cheating scandal thing again? Digital solves for it, but paper is just less secure. And then the concordance, I'm blitzing through, so we'll have time for questions, and we'll talk openly. The concordance, they say, is not going to be necessary. They're going to align them. We're going to have research later next year showing us these things do align. And we don't think the NCAA is going to be involved anymore, because I think they're dropping their test requirement eligibility index piece. So they'll do it themselves. And they did say that these scores are going to be linked, relatable, not equated, identical. And so we don't exactly know if I got a 550 on the paper, would I, as my score is linked, is it going to be exact? So we're still trying to figure this out, and we're going to get more data on this soon. And part of that reason is we're not sure our school's in a super score. We don't know yet. That's still a big open question. One thing they're getting rid of test return. Before, you could spend $20 and there are 3 test dates a year where I get my test back. Not anymore, but they're going to keep releasing practice, but not your test. You don't ever get your test back anymore, but they're going to have full tests, and every year they're going to release more material. And we do know that the April pilot test came back in August. Some of our kids were happy, some weren't happy. Someone on Reddit and they just complained, but some kids on Reddit were like, I crushed it. So it seems like kids going online to log in are more likely to have had a bad experience. Typically, the ones who are happy tend not to want to get involved. But we don't have any data, whether it was similar in difficulty, but we definitely, for sure, some kids who got like 720 on paper got a 630 on digital. And so they thought they did great, but they probably got routed into the easier module. So they weren't well calibrated. Like, I crushed it. You crushed it at the lower level. And so you didn't have the harder items. So there is a strong preference that 8 out of 10 kids who are taking the paper and digital prefer digital. That's compelling. 8 out of 10. So only 2 out of 10 prefer paper. And they may have liked to be able to write on the test or annotate, but they, administrators also prefer the simplicity of administering it without scantrons and collecting stuff. So it seems like this is a popular test. Why kids like it? Shorter, less mental endurance, shorter passages, less working memory, less skimming, more time per question, so it's less speedy. Calculator is always there, and then your results come back faster. They will come back faster once things are up and running. Things we know, are we going to have more kids taking the ACT? Maybe. That happened in 2016. Will there be a big push to get your testing done early and avoided? Potentially. Will some homeschool kids have a challenge getting access to testing spots? Potentially. We don't know how available they're going to be. If everyone's locking it up during the school day, will that be harder for homeschool kids? Maybe. Will colleges super score the tests? No one knows. No one's on the record with this yet. And some will say yes, some will say no. College Board said, we've talked to all of our colleagues and the colleges, and they say they'll continue to use the scores as they have. And because they're saying the scores should be equated, many schools will super score. This didn't, that's my impression. This didn't happen in 2016 because these scores were recentered and the center point changed by 80 points. So, a midpoint was 1,000 on the 2015 ST, but then it became a 1080. And so they're like, these scores aren't comparable. So most colleges didn't super score. However, more did in 2005 because, the verbal was still the verbal. They added the writing on. In my experience, I'm expecting many colleges will super score, but not all by no means. And some will say they're different forums, and we're not going to super score. There's no news from the ACT. They say we're going to keep delivering our computer-based version of the paper test as they have for the past 3 years for international kids. And the way you prep, download the Blue Book app, go through it, practice tests and items, get comfortable with Desmos. We're making a guide. And of course, we help kids go through this. Like people like Ian are going to be helping students get ready for this test, Applerouth Tutor. So we're going to be ready for this test. We have 20 years. We already have fixed form digital tests for the ST and ACT, which we've been giving for years. And we're going to develop a best-in-class digital adaptive test for our kids and for y'all. All right, the things that we do. Again, academic tutoring with hundreds of thousands of kids. We do hundreds and thousands, not 100,000. Test preparation for all these tests and more, and EF coaching. I think we'll do a quick poll right now. Just real brief. Tell us who you are. Are you a student? Are you a parent? Or a guardian? Educator? If you are, do you have a high school senior, junior, sophomore, freshman? If you are a parent, then question number 3: do you need any help with any of these things that we do? Test prep, academic tutoring, EF coaching, and then number 4: do you want anyone to reach out to you? That's it. You can close that, and then let's go on to our Q&A session. I think we have 20 questions teed up here. Why don't we? Oh, and also one call to action. We are doing the SAT, ACT test prep kickoff, where we're giving free strat sessions for kids and then giving kids a free full practice test. And so anyone wants to get involved in this, it's going to be in like 2 weeks, full free practice and free session for strategy. If you have any kids who are taking these tests. Okay, that's applerouth.com/kickoff. All right, that was our call to action. All right, let us do it. Questions and answers. Shall we dive in? Ian?
We shall, yeah. In no particular order as I can see them. First of all, yes, we'll send out the recording in a few days. I think that addresses half of the questions that are on here. How would you advise international students to prepare for the first digital SAT in March? Download the Blue Book app as soon as possible.
If you're ready to rock and roll, you go online and type in, the Blue Book app, College Board, then download it. Takes a minute. It's an app on your desktop, and you open it up. You have to have an account, so you can create an educator account, or I have a student account from my years taking it, and then you have access to the tests. And also on the College Board, you can go and type in the linear, if you want the linear test, but that isn't as helpful. So I would, download the Blue Book app, and then you can start to see what your kids are going to see.
We had one question. I'm a little confused. How much is this happening in the US? If I can actually, so all SATs will be this come March 2024. So we've got one more academic year, really, of paper-based tests, what we're used to now in the States. However, on the 19th of November, there is the opportunity, if folks want, for a pilot program that you can sign up for. That I'm sure it won't be the last one either, but there will be an opportunity if you want, as a student, to just sit and take the digital SAT, and you can decide later on if you want to submit it or not. So you get to have a look at your scores and then see if they should be submitted as official.
Yes.
I think they can be reported to colleges in late January 2023.
Excellent.
So it can happen.
Perfect. There are some other questions.
Sorry, go ahead.
Let me just kind of go through. Alan had a question. Is it all multiple choice? They're going to be the math questions again. They're going to be the student response. That's it. A few student response questions for math, a handful of those. Jack had a question. Can the student answer questions at his or her own pace? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you self-pace. You have the section timing. You go back and forth. You can go back, change your answers, and then when you're done, at the end of it all, it's all loads up at once, and so you can pace yourself. Ian.
What I don't think Jack Whelan, I'm not quite sure. What you can't do is, I don't think, say you finish the last math in half the time. You can't choose to get, you can't advance. You can't choose to get up, because I think they've tried doing that in the past, and it causes like too much of a disruption.
Yeah, you can go to the bathroom.
But they might refine how they implement the timer.
Yeah, but right now you're locked into that timer. And then when it's finished. But it isn't that much time, and it's a short test. You can hang out for a few minutes. Natalie had a question about your calculator. If you don't like Desmos, can I my TI? Of course. Some kids won't touch Desmos. Some kids are more facile with their own computer, with their own technology. They can use that totally fine. But the Desmos is baked in, and I like how it's just right there. But you can totally use your own handheld, no problem at all. All right. Will it be easier or harder to get a good score? Will the bell curve be wider? Wider bell curve. In terms of norming this test, we haven't yet seen the scoring distributions in the center point. They say they're going to try to keep it, so they're linked. So they're so I don't think we're going to see that big of a change in the distribution of scores. That's my instinct, but they're going to try to maintain a similar curve to the current one. So. But we'll learn more. They're going to give the studies out in a year, how well this predicts and what these scores mean, and also once these, I guess after March, will they give us the curves? Well, we'll start to see. Will they give us the raw scale conversions? I don't know. I don't know if they're going to give us that in the same way. I don't know. Or is it going to be a black box if you scored like the GMAT doesn't give you that, so they just tell you what you got. So I am not certain, and there's a question of whether we'll actually see it to actually look at the full curve. Or, well, you know what? Maybe it's interesting. Like for 90 years, we've had paper, they give like the national report, and they show you the scores and the percentages. Will they do that going forward? I'm not sure. I assume they will for continuity's sake, but they don't have to. But I think they will say like X percent of kids, a 680 is a 70 percentile, whatever it is, a 95th percentile. I'm assuming, and we'll have that information relatively, soon. I think each year they give you the national report for the students. They show we had 1.7 million kids. Here's the breakdown, and here's the curve. Here's the so I'm assuming we'll get that. Okay. All right. Next up, foreign language learners. I'm wondering how it will impact students who use other tools like circling, underlining, or notes. Will they lose that right? Ian, take it away.
Kind of, yeah, they will. So we will have come up with we have come up with other devices that can help on the reading but it will be a little bit more of a challenge as far as, I don't think that the annotation applies just to foreign language students. I think it applies to anybody who takes this test. There are different ways that you can use their program to click on things. But you have to sort of, you can't do all of the things that you used to be able to do with the paper test, certainly. So
Yeah.
that is one thing that I am, I look forward to seeing how students adapt. The benefit, though, is that I think it makes a huge difference that they are shorter passages for that.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that we would do to try to break down every paragraph of a longer passage, it doesn't feel as urgent this time. So there are trade-offs.
Yeah, that's right. And I didn't need to annotate. I mean, I played with it some. Like, it's actually a pretty decent feature where you highlight it, you type in your things, and then you save the annotations. But honestly, they're like 11 sentences. So the working memory load is so reduced. I don't think many of our kids will use that feature, the annotations. I mean, some of them certainly will, but there's just so much less. And from my experience, I tutored, like, when kids were going on the GRE, like taking computer-based tests and learning how to go from, doing math on the page to math on the screen and going back and forth with your scratch paper. And the kids get it. They make that adaptation. So even though if they've been working on the paper, writing, they're going to be able to recreate the grid, write down their notes here and look up on the screen. And then they have all the extra time to do that. So even if it's a little bit less efficient, I'm going to be able to actually recreate this whole thing, write the numbers down here and go back and forth, and I have an extra half a minute for that. So kids will make it. Kids will be okay. They'll make that migration to it's on the screen. I can still take notes on the paper. Kids get that eventually, in my experience working with students. Okay. Okay, Rick, given all this upfront analysis, with your guidance as to taking the March 24, go for it. What's happened? Do you want to have give kids time to work out the kinks? There could well be fewer kinks. I think there are going to be fewer kinks because we're already working with the test. I mean, the one they're working, and it's on your app, and there's no issue of connectivity. It's like your experience taking it in your house should be very, very, very similar as taking it. And they already worked some of the kinks out, like, during the pandemic with the massive thing with the AP exam stuff. So I'm expecting a much smoother rollout. And it could be a disaster and everything falls to, goes to hell in a handbasket. But it seems like they're doing things to make this, they're giving themselves the best possible chance to having a smooth rollout. And also, they're working the kinks out internationally. But again, I don't see that many issues with this. So we'll see. And there was a question about which device can you bring. You can't bring an iPhone. It has to be a tablet or a laptop, Chromebook. So yeah, and this school will, if you don't have a Chromebook or a MacBook or a Windows computer or a tablet, you can coordinate with school to get one with the College Board. But most of our kids have access to a simple tablet or Chromebook's $100. And so the grand scheme of things, I don't think there'll be a major issue of scarcity of having a device, and many kids will want to use their own device. But it's nice that you're not reliant upon the school. The school has their technology, but like for lower income schools, there may be the College Board is going to be more involved, working with nonprofits, 501c3s to make sure the kids have enough Chromebooks on the day of or tablets. They'll be working with Apple and working with, Alphabet to make sure the kids have what they need and so forth.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions? Ian, what's left? Oh, accommodations.
I was going to say, will the accommodations change or be different?
And honestly, there's going to be easier. Extra time, all you do is enter the code. So you aren't relying upon the teacher to call a timeout. If you enter the code is 5845JJ, bam, I get extra time, I get extra breaks, and it's baked into the app. If I have dyslexia and they give me the ability to have, text to speech, I enter the code, bam, I'm going to be able to, and they'll give you more information like from the disabilities coordinator about if you have to bring a headset, if there's text to speech. But it's honestly so much better that, I don't have to have a reader. Now it's all going to be digital. I can play it again 10 times, change the speed up. It's a better combination. I can change the contrast, the font size on the screen. So combinations, I think, get better. This is better for kids with disabilities in my experience. Okay. And right now they're relatively easy to get. As long as you have a accommodation in the school, you have the disability diagnosed, it shouldn't be a real challenge. There's a question about Egypt, one of the countries that was banned because there was test security. Any idea whether the digital test will be available to us? Well, this solves for the item exposure that happened in Egypt and happened in Hong Kong and happened in China. Like this gets rid of that. You can't leak it. So even if there's no single test form. So I think, I don't know the timing of it, but I'd be amazed if it was long before Egypt was able to administer this test again, because it is so much more secure. All right. I have a sophomore in the US. When would you suggest that we begin prepping for digital tests, assuming we need to scores the schools by 11-1? So ultimately, we start prepping for this thing. But Ian, any thoughts on timing?
I don't think that the timing would change terribly much, because by and large, I mean, we've hit on the things that are different, but there's so much more that is the same here. So I don't think that the timing recommendations would change. I think that, come talk to us next summer, really.
There was one question that's specific. Natalie asked for the timer. Does a timer flash 5 minutes before? I think it, I'm trying to remember it. I saw it. When the flash, there's some kind of thing where it gives you some indication there's 5 minutes left. It does. I don't know exactly what, does the font change? There's some shift. I can't remember exactly, but it does give you a note that there's 5 minutes left. I forget exactly.
I didn't get under 5 minutes for any section, so I don't know.
I just forgot exactly, but they do indicate it. Jacqueline, does the computer block other programs from running? Yeah, you can't have chat open. Like, it locks you down. Your home screen is locked down. It controls the whole screen for an official test. For tutors that aren't as comfortable with technology like this, will it be challenging to shift their method of tutoring? How much training will it take? I mean, we've been doing everything for so long with, we've had Zoom for 5 years. We've been doing computer-based tutoring for over 10 years now. So I'm trying to think.
I mean, I can say,
Ian, yeah.
Part of our training, even now for new hires, is getting them familiar with our website, where we already have a lot of online questions. We're constantly flushing out that database, and then getting them familiar with Zoom and how to use it as a tool to teach. I don't think that, like I said, like, part of what I think is going to be part and parcel of this is getting students familiar with how to use this online calculator system, the Desmos. So I think that it's perfectly okay if tutors start to feel uncomfortable, but it's going to be our job as well to make sure that our tutors, and then thereby our students, feel comfortable with the programs.
There was a question. I see your November kickoff dates are going to be, they don't offer a Saturday morning test, only ACT. Our Kuwait kids are in school on Sunday. Any chance you can offer a Saturday morning test? Like, we have a self-proctoring solution, and we take it pretty much whenever you want. I think it's an on-demand kind of proctoring. Is that, Ian, that kids can take it at their leisure, essentially?
They can, yes. And then, yeah.
Okay. So
yeah.
that's a quick one there. Then, do we know if the ratio of students to proctors will change? Do we have guidance yet from the College Board of how many teachers to students, what the ratio is going to be? I don't know. I don't think it's going to change, but I could be wrong. And I've taken this test in huge auditoriums at college camp, like with like 150 kids with that. But will it be different based on the having a paper test versus a computer-based test? Are they going to shift how many? Any idea, Ian? I haven't heard anything about this one yet.
Me neither. No. It's a great question, and I'm sorry to say I don't know.
But I assume it's not going to shift the guidance, that the schools themselves determine the ratio. Because I've taken it in a room with 15 kids. I've taken it in a room with 150 kids at Georgia State. So there is a tremendous variability. But there's like one lead proctor, and they have supporting help when you have a huge room. But I don't know if they intend to change the ratio of what's required or mandated by the College Board. All right, it is 10:11 where we are, and we have exhausted all the questions. So we will be sending a recording of this that you'll be able to watch again and go through any things you might have missed. we are here. We are deep in analysis, and then next phase will be test creation. So we're going to make sure our kids have all the stuff they need. If you need any support with this test, that's why we're here to help, as well as if your kids need any help with academic subjects, physics or math or reading, or EF coaching. We're here for y'all. And thanks for being here this morning or evening with us, wherever you are, if you're in Kuwait or if you're in, if you're in New York. And we'll look forward to giving you more information as we keep evolving our understanding of this. And look for more newsletters. I'll be writing about this most recent batch of practice tests on the next newsletter in November. And we look forward to helping you however we can. All right, y'all. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you, folks.